The first thing I heard that morning wasn't birds, wasn't traffic, wasn't even my coffee maker sputtering itself awake. It was metal snapping under pressure. Loud, sharp, ugly. The kind of sound that instantly tells you somebody's doing something they absolutely should not be doing. I looked out my kitchen window, and there he was, standing beside my fence with a pair of yellow bolt cutters like some discount action movie villain, jaws clenched, cigarette hanging off his lip, cutting straight through the chain I'd installed less than a year earlier. No knock on the door, no warning, no, "Hey man, can we talk about this?" Nothing. Just crunch, clank, toss. Then he threw the broken chain right into my driveway like he was making a point. And the crazy part? He looked proud of himself, like he'd finally corrected some injustice that had been bothering him for years. That was my neighbor, Travis Barlow. Every neighborhood's got one. Guy owns a business, buys 2 loud trucks, suddenly starts acting like he's chairman of the county board. Travis ran a grading and excavation outfit out of the property next to mine, and for years we had what I thought was a decent understanding. See, there's this narrow strip of land running along the east edge of my property, maybe 18 feet wide, long enough to connect the back service road to the open lot behind his workshop. My uncle bought that parcel back in the late 80s when this whole area was mostly dirt roads and storage yards, and when he got too old to maintain it, I bought it from him in 2012. Legit sale, clean title, surveyed, taxed, recorded, all boring legal stuff nobody cares about until suddenly they care a lot. Travis had been using that corridor for years because it saved him time moving equipment around. Dump trailers, mini excavators, skid steers. He'd roll them right through there instead of taking the public access road around the block. And honestly, I never minded. We had a handshake arrangement. He kept the gravel level, made sure his guys didn't leave debris everywhere, and I let him pass through. Simple, normal neighbor stuff. But somewhere along the line, that arrangement stopped being enough for him. You could feel it building over the last year or so, little comments here and there, the kind people make when they slowly convince themselves your property is actually theirs. He'd say things like, "Well, everybody uses that path," or "that corridor's basically shared access anyway." Basically, that word does a lot of heavy lifting for entitled people. Then one afternoon about 6 months before the fence incident, he caught me outside while I was unloading groceries and said, "You know, if you ever sell this place, whoever buys it's going to have to keep access open. That road's important to the neighborhood." I remember just staring at him because, what neighborhood? We're talking about 4 industrial lots and 2 houses next to a drainage ditch. Nobody's hosting block parties out here. But the way he said it stuck with me. It wasn't casual conversation. It sounded rehearsed, like he'd already decided something in his head and was testing the waters before pushing further. Around the same time, I started noticing his employees using the corridor even when he wasn't home. Early mornings, late evenings. One Sunday, I caught a guy hauling scrap metal through there with a forklift while I was grilling burgers in the backyard. Didn't even wave. That's when I installed the chain across the entrance. Not because I wanted a war, but because boundaries matter, and once people start treating permission like ownership, things get ugly fast. Travis lost his mind the second he saw it. Came storming across the property line red-faced, yelling that I was interrupting commercial access. Commercial access. Like he was filing a lawsuit in his own imagination. I told him the same thing I'd told him before. You can still use it if you ask. That should have been the end of it. Instead, 3 days later, I woke up to the sound of bolt cutters chewing through steel. And when I walked outside and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing, he didn't even hesitate. He leaned against his truck, pointed toward the corridor, and said, "That road's been shared for years, Mason. I'm not playing these games with you." Shared. That word again. Like if you repeat a lie enough times, property law just gives up and goes home. And standing there in my driveway, staring at my cut chain laying in the gravel, I realized something real uncomfortable. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. Travis genuinely believed convenience had somehow turned into ownership. And people who believe that kind of thing usually don't stop on their own. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people get themselves into trouble, especially in small towns, rural properties, HOA neighborhoods, or anywhere people rely too heavily on. We've always done it this way. According to standard procedure, access rights to private land don't magically appear because somebody's been driving across it for a few years. That's not how ownership works. No matter how confident your neighbor sounds while holding a coffee cup and pointing at your driveway like he's the mayor. From a legal perspective, there's a massive difference between permission and entitlement. Permission means the owner can revoke access anytime they want. Entitlement means there's a legally recorded easement, court order, or binding agreement attached to the property deed itself. And trust me, counties keep records of that stuff because land disputes turn neighbors into enemies faster than almost anything else. The dangerous part is psychological. This is a psychological trap people fall into all the time. Repeated convenience slowly rewires the brain into believing access equals ownership. Somebody borrows your tools long enough, suddenly they stop asking. Somebody parks in front of your house every day, eventually they act offended when you park there yourself. Human beings normalize patterns incredibly fast, especially when those patterns benefit them financially. And in Travis's case, every shortcut through my corridor saved his company time, fuel, and labor. Over the years, that little convenience stopped feeling like a favor to him. In his mind, it became infrastructure. The lesson here is, if you own property, especially land with shared-looking access routes, boundaries need to stay visible and documented. Because the second people stop seeing your permission as temporary, they start rewriting the story in their heads. And once that happens, they'll defend that fantasy like it's the truth. So after Travis cut that chain, I didn't scream, didn't threaten him, didn't do any of the dramatic stuff people fantasize about doing in neighbor disputes. Honestly, that's the moment I got very, very calm, because once somebody crosses a line that confidently, you stop arguing with them emotionally and start dealing with them systematically. And people like Travis never see that coming. He thought we were having a disagreement between neighbors. What he didn't realize was that he had just handed me documentation. The second he cut that chain without permission, this stopped being awkward tension and turned into property destruction and trespassing. Big difference. I went back inside, made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and started pulling records. First thing I checked was the county GIS parcel map, just to confirm what I already knew. Sure enough, that entire corridor sat fully inside my boundary lines. No overlap, no public utility designation, nothing weird hiding in the records. Then I called a real estate attorney named Claire Donahue, a woman who speaks with the energy of somebody perpetually disappointed in humanity, which, honestly, makes her excellent at her job. I told her the situation, and she actually laughed halfway through my explanation. Not because it was funny, but because she'd clearly seen this exact type of neighbor before. "Let me guess," she said. "He thinks years of informal use created permanent access rights." Exactly. She pulled the title records that same afternoon, checked the easement registry, and confirmed there was absolutely nothing attached to my property granting Travis legal access. No ingress easement, no prescriptive easement filing, no maintenance agreement, nothing. Clean title. According to standard procedure, if somebody wants guaranteed access across private land, they either negotiate an easement formally or they buy the rights outright. You don't acquire ownership through confidence and bolt cutters. Claire told me something that stuck in my head for the rest of this mess. She said, "People confuse tolerated behavior with protected rights all the time." That sentence pretty much summarized Travis perfectly. Now here's where things got interesting. Most people assumed I'd just replace the chain and move on, but by then I understood something important. If I left any ambiguity at all, this problem would come back again and again. So instead of patching the fence, I decided to erase the argument completely. 3 days later, I hired a licensed contractor to build a full 8-foot timber fence reinforced with concrete posts along the entire corridor. 340 feet of very expensive clarity. Permitted, surveyed, inspected, every inch documented. And let me tell you, watching those post holes get drilled into the ground felt weirdly therapeutic. Travis noticed construction almost immediately. Day one, he drove over in his work truck while the crew was unloading lumber and just sat there idling at the entrance staring at everybody like he was trying to intimidate them through windshield energy alone. Eventually, he got out and marched straight toward me. "You seriously doing this?" he asked. I remember shrugging and saying, "Apparently, I need a stronger fence." That did not improve his mood. He started ranting about access, about neighborhood cooperation, about how his business had used that route for years. Then he dropped the line that told me exactly how deep he'd convinced himself of this fantasy. He said, "You can't just block established use like this. Established use. Not legal easement. Not recorded agreement. Established use. He was building an entire legal theory out of vibes. From a legal perspective, that's like trying to pay taxes with monopoly money. Claire had already warned me this would happen. This is a psychological trap people fall into when convenience becomes routine. Their brain edits out the original favor and replaces it with assumed entitlement. Travis genuinely saw himself as the victim. Didn't matter that the county records disagreed. Didn't matter that he'd never paid for easement rights. In his head, long-term access had become ownership adjacent. And honestly, that mindset makes people dangerous because they stop seeing boundaries as real. Construction finished 6 days later. The fence looked incredible. Thick timber panels, reinforced gates, steel hardware. The kind of fence that silently communicates, this conversation is over. I thought that would finally end things. Nope. 2 mornings later, one of my security cameras caught Travis's crew cutting across the rear corner of the property with a skid steer. They weren't using the old entrance anymore, but they were still clipping part of my land to save turning space. Tiny incursion, maybe 6 feet across the line, but legally? Still trespassing. So I documented it. Timestamped footage. Screenshots. Property survey overlay. Then it happened again the following week with a trailer. Then again 4 days later with an excavator bucket extending over the boundary while they maneuvered around the fence line. Every single incident got documented and forwarded to Claire. No emotion. No confrontation. Just evidence. That's the part people don't understand about property disputes. The calm person with records usually wins. Loudness impresses neighbors. Documentation impresses judges. After the 3rd violation, Claire sent Travis a formal trespass notice along with a civil demand for the destroyed chain and fence damage totaling $2,200. She also included copies of the surveillance images and a statement clarifying that continued unauthorized access would trigger escalating penalties. Suddenly, Mr. Shared Access got very quiet. Funny how confidence changes once paperwork enters the room. About 2 weeks later, Travis tried one final move. He cornered me outside while I was dragging trash bins to the curb and started talking in that fake reasonable tone people use when they realize they're losing. "Come on, Mason," he said. "We've both lived here a long time. We really gonna turn this into lawyers and cameras?" Which was incredible considering he was literally the one who brought bolt cutters onto my property like a raccoon with anger issues. I told him the truth. "You turned it into lawyers the second you cut my fence." He just stared at me for a second, jaw twitching, probably realizing there was no version of this where he got his shortcut back. And here's the beautiful part. The alternate access road he'd been avoiding this entire time? It added maybe 8 extra minutes to his route. 8 minutes. That's what all this was about. Not survival. Not necessity. Convenience. He'd convinced himself saving a few minutes per equipment run mattered more than respecting somebody else's property rights. That level of entitlement will ruin people if nobody pushes back on it. 31 days after the original incident, Travis signed a settlement agreement, paid the full $2,200 for damages, acknowledged in writing that no easement existed, and agreed to cease all access across my property permanently. No courtroom drama. No screaming match. Just signatures and consequences. I'd love to tell you he apologized, but people like Travis rarely apologize because that would require admitting they were never fighting for fairness in the first place. They were fighting for control. The fence still stands today. Solid as hell too. And every once in a while I'll see one of Travis's trucks taking the long route around toward the public access road, crawling past my property while that giant timber fence stretches down the corridor beside him like a physical reminder that favors are not ownership. He never waves anymore. Doesn't even look over. Which honestly works great for me. Because some neighbor disputes end with compromise, and others end with a very expensive lesson in property law. Looking back on the whole thing now, what really sticks with me isn't the money, or the fence, or even the legal fight. It's how incredibly easy it is for people to slowly convince themselves they deserve access to something they never actually owned. And honestly, you see this everywhere once you start paying attention. Shared driveways, parking spots, family property, HOA common areas. Somebody does a favor long enough, and eventually another person stops seeing it as kindness and starts seeing it as an obligation. That's where resentment gets born. The scary part is most of these conflicts don't start with hatred. They start with familiarity, repetition, Routine. A few years of, hey man, go ahead, slowly mutates into, well, I've always used it, and then finally evolves into, you can't stop me. That progression happens way more often than people realize. From a legal perspective, this is exactly why documentation matters more than assumptions. Handshake agreements feel friendly, right up until one side decides the handshake means something completely different. And look, I get why people avoid formal boundaries. Nobody wants to be that neighbor. Nobody wants to look difficult or paranoid. But according to standard procedure, clear boundaries actually prevent conflict way more often than they create it. Ambiguity is what causes wars between neighbors because human beings fill unclear spaces with self-serving interpretations. Travis thought history gave him rights. I thought courtesy still mattered. Turns out only one of those ideas survives contact with county records. And psychologically, this whole situation says something uncomfortable about entitlement too. This is a psychological trap that success can create in people, especially business owners or dominant personalities who get used to solving problems by pushing through resistance. Eventually, they stop hearing the word no as a boundary and start hearing it as an obstacle. That's dangerous, because once somebody believes convenience outranks consent, escalation becomes almost inevitable. The lesson here is simple. Generosity without boundaries eventually gets mistaken for weakness by the wrong person. And once that happens, the only language some people understand is consequence. So now I'm curious, if you were in my position, would you have handled it differently? Would you have kept the peace and reopened access? Or built the fence anyway? And more importantly, have you ever had a neighbor slowly start treating your property like it belonged to them too? Because if there's one thing I learned through all this, property lines are easy to draw on paper, but human boundaries? Those are the ones people really love testing.